And now Israel is bracing for severe weather as
In May of 2022, the United Nations World Food Programme issued a report that its executive director, David Beasley, described in a press conference as the worst food crisis in the organization's history. He said, without exaggeration, that the world was facing a catastrophe on top of a catastrophe. 49 million people in 43 countries were living in what the WFP classified as emergency hunger conditions, one level below famine. The number had more than doubled in 2 years. Beasley is not a religious figure. He was a former governor of South Carolina. He is careful with language. And the word he used was catastrophe. At the same time those figures were published, Russia had already been at war with Ukraine for 3 months. Ukraine, before the invasion, supplied roughly 10% of the world's wheat, 13% of its corn, and 46% of its sunflower oil. Those supply chains collapsed in a matter of weeks. Port blockades, bombed grain storage facilities, fields that could not be planted because the farmers were fighting or dead. The price of wheat on global markets jumped 60% in the first month of the war alone. And at the same time that was happening, the world was still carrying the economic wreckage of a global pandemic that had begun 2 years earlier. Supply chains fractured. Fertilizer prices had risen 300% from their 2020 baseline because the natural gas used to produce fertilizers had become scarce and expensive. Less fertilizer meant smaller harvests. Smaller harvests meant higher prices. Higher prices meant more hunger. The dominoes were already falling. And in the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil travels, had been under a U.S. naval blockade for months, with active military exchanges taking place on a near-weekly basis between American destroyers and Iranian naval forces, war, famine, conflict over resources, death spreading from multiple directions simultaneously. If you have read the book of Revelation, something about that combination of words should be familiar. Like this video and subscribe to the channel before we go further, and comment below the word watching. Because what we are going to look at in this video is one of the most specific and dramatic prophetic passages in all of Scripture. And what we are going to show is that the imagery of that passage does not require a leap of faith to recognize in the world around us right now. It requires nothing more than open eyes and the willingness to see what is already there. Revelation chapter 6. What? The text actually says most. People who have heard of the 4 horsemen have a vague cultural image. Riders on colored horses. Apocalyptic. Dramatic. Often referenced in movies and music without much precision about what the text behind them actually says. The passage is in Revelation chapter 6. John, writing from the island of Patmos around 95 AD, describes a sealed scroll held by the one sitting on the throne in heaven. The Lamb, which is the symbol Revelation uses consistently for Jesus Christ, is the only one found worthy to open the scroll. He breaks the seals one by one, and as each seal is broken, a rider appears. Verse 2, the first seal. A white horse. Its rider held a bow and was given a crown. He rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. Verse 4, the second seal. A red horse. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. He was given a large sword. Verse 5, the third seal. A black horse. Its rider held a pair of scales in his hand. And a voice said, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine. Verse 8. The fourth seal. A pale horse. Its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed close behind. They were given power over 1/4 of the earth to kill by sword, famine and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. 4 horses, 4 riders, 4 distinct domains of human catastrophe, deceptive conquest, war, famine with precise economic detail, death from multiple simultaneous causes. And here is the thing that most casual readers miss. The text does not say these events will happen sequentially, one after the other, cleanly separated in time. It says the seals are opened in sequence, but the conditions they describe are not necessarily separated. They can be, and in the text's own internal logic appear to be, overlapping, simultaneous. The riders appear one by one, but they ride at the same time. Hold that in mind. Because what is happening in the world right now is not happening in neat sequential chapters. It is happening simultaneously, in multiple regions, across multiple domains, at the same time. Comment below after this next section. Because the white horse is where this story gets strange in a way that most prophecy discussions do not address honestly. The white horse. The rider, Bushio, looks like victory. The white horse is the confusing one. In Christian imagery, white generally means purity or righteousness. And later in Revelation, in chapter 19, a white horse does appear carrying Jesus himself into battle. So the instinct of many readers is that the first rider, on the white horse, represents something good. Christ's advance into the world, the gospel spreading. But read the verse carefully. Rider is given a crown. In Greek, the word used is stephanos, which is a victor's crown, the kind awarded at athletic competitions. It is not a royal crown. And the rider has a bow, but no arrows are mentioned. Some translators read this as a figure who appears victorious, but is not actually fighting in the way the text normally describes warfare. He holds the weapon of war but uses the appearance of victory rather than the reality of it. And he is bent on conquest. The Greek is nikaon kai hina nikesi. He goes out conquering and to conquer. The conquest is the goal. The method is the ambiguity. Many serious commentators, including the 19th century theologian John Nelson Darby, and more recently scholars like David Jeremiah and Joel Rosenberg, have identified the first rider not as Christ but as a counterfeit, a figure or system that imitates peace and victory. That appears to offer resolution while actually initiating a sequence of events that ends in catastrophe. The mechanism of that deception: false peace. Announced negotiations that do not hold. Declarations of victory that do not match the situation on the ground. Deals that promise security while conflict continues. Look at the last 18 months. The United States declared a ceasefire with Iran on multiple occasions. President Trump announced that the war was terminated, that hostilities were concluded, that America had won. On the same day that announcement was made, U.S. destroyers were in active combat in the Strait of Hormuz. On the day that the ceasefire was declared, Iranian ballistic missiles struck the United Arab Emirates. The announced peace and the actual conflict ran simultaneously, both described as real, both occupying the same week. The WHO's declaration that COVID-19 was no longer a public health emergency of international concern was made in May of 2023. The virus had not stopped circulating. Long COVID was affecting an estimated 65 million people globally, according to a study published in The Lancet. The declaration of the emergency's end did not match the ongoing reality of its consequences. In 2020, the Abraham Accords were signed with a significant ceremony, described as a breakthrough for Middle Eastern peace. Within 4 years, the region was in the most active multi-party military conflict it had seen in decades. None of these comparisons prove the White Rider is any specific person or policy. That claim would be too certain, and certainty is not what this video is offering. What is visible is a pattern. Declared peace that does not stop conflict. Announced victory that does not match the battlefield. The appearance of resolution functioning as a precursor to escalation rather than a replacement for it. The white horse goes first, and then the red horse follows. The red horse. Peace taken from the earth. Verse 4. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. To him was given a large sword. Peace. Not just the absence of a specific war. Peace from the earth. A global condition. The Uppsala Conflict Data Program, based at Uppsala University in Sweden, has tracked armed conflicts worldwide since 1946. Its definition of a conflict is at least 25 battle deaths in a calendar year. By that measure, the number of active armed conflicts worldwide reached 59 in 2023, the highest number recorded since the program began tracking 59 active conflicts. Simultaneously, Russia and Ukraine, now in its fourth year, with total military and civilian deaths estimated by various bodies at between 300,000 and 500,000, depending on methodology. The Iran-US conflict in the Persian Gulf, ongoing with active military exchanges. Sudan's civil war, which began in April 2023 and had displaced over 8 million people within a year. The Democratic Republic of Congo, where a conflict involving at least 9 foreign militaries has continued with varying intensity for over 2 decades but escalated significantly in 2023 and 2024. Myanmar's civil war following the 2021 military coup. Ethiopia's ongoing Tigray-related conflicts. The Israel-Gaza-Lebanon theater, these are not small disagreements. Sudan alone produced what the UN described as the world's largest displacement crisis by late 2023. 8 million people moved from their homes by a conflict that most people in the Western world could not locate on a map because 40 other conflicts were competing for the same attention. Revelation 6:4 says the writer takes peace from the earth, not from a region, not from a specific country. The scope is global. The condition being described is a world in which the general background condition of relative peace, which most of the second half of the 20th century maintained, despite localized conflicts, is no longer the default state. The Global Peace Index, published annually by the Institute for Economics and Peace, measures the peacefulness of 163 nations using 23 indicators. In 2023, it recorded the largest single-year decline in global peacefulness since the index began in 2008. The average level of global peacefulness deteriorated for the 15th time in 16 years. 15 of 16 years. Not a temporary disruption. A sustained and measurable trend. The writer does not cause each individual conflict. The text says he takes peace. He removes the condition, and into the vacuum that follows, people kill each other. The specific conflicts are the consequence. The removal of peace is the cause. Whether this is a literal supernatural writer or a description of spiritual and political conditions that produce a world increasingly unable to maintain any stable peace, is a question each reader brings their own discernment to. What is not a question is whether the condition the verse describes is visible in the world right now. It is visible. The numbers confirm it. Stay with this. Because the black horse is where the personal impact of this passage hits closest to home. Black horse, the scales and the numberus, the third seal. Revelation 6:5-6. A black horse. Its rider holds a pair of scales. And a voice from among the 4 living creatures says, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine. A pair of scales in the ancient world was an instrument of commerce, of measured exchange, of the weighing of goods against currency. The rider is not carrying a weapon. He is carrying the instrument of the marketplace, and what the voice announces is a price. 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages. In the Roman world, a denarius was roughly a day's pay for a laborer. 2 pounds of wheat would typically cost a fraction of a denarius in normal market conditions. The price announced in verse 6 is roughly 8 to 12 times the normal rate. This is not just hunger. It is economic collapse expressed through food prices. The means of feeding a family consuming the entirety of a household's income. Nothing left for anything else. Survive on grain, or spend your entire day's earnings doing it. And then the strange qualifier. Do not damage the oil and the wine. Luxury goods, the expensive things, left untouched while the basic food supply is priced beyond ordinary reach. This is the specific economic signature of what economists call food inflation in a context of broader economic inequality. The basics become unaffordable for the poor. The luxuries remain available for the wealthy. The scales measure the distance between them, In 2022, global food prices reached their highest level since the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations began its food price index in 1990. The index averaged 143.7 in 2022, surpassing the previous record set in 2011 during the Arab Spring food crisis, which itself had contributed to the political destabilization of multiple governments. The specific crops that drove the 2022 surge were wheat and corn. The same crops named in the ancient text, the crops most directly affected by the Ukraine war. The crops whose disruption hit poorest countries hardest because wealthier countries had supply diversification and financial buffers that lower-income countries did not. In Lebanon, wheat shortages following the 2022 supply disruptions pushed bread prices up 400% in a country that was already collapsing economically from the 2019 financial crisis and the 2020 Beirut port explosion. A Lebanese family that spent 10% of its income on bread in 2019 was spending 40 or 50% by 2022. The rest of the budget simply did not exist. In Yemen, where a civil war involving Iranian-backed Houthi forces and a Saudi-led coalition had been running since 2015, the combination of conflict, supply disruption, and currency collapse produced conditions that the UN described as the worst food security situation in the world. By 2023, 17 million Yemenis were classified as food insecure, the oil and the wine. In 2022, global olive oil production was disrupted by drought across Spain, Greece, and Italy. By late 2023, olive oil prices had risen approximately 250% over their 2020 baseline. For the average European household, this registered as a significant but manageable increase in grocery costs. For subsistence-level households in the Global South, the increase in basic food costs represented the difference between eating and not eating. The wealthy economies noticed the price changes. They felt them in their grocery bills. They discussed them in terms of inflation and central bank policy and interest rates. The poorer economies did not discuss them. They buried their dead. The scales in Revelation 6 are not a metaphor for injustice in a general philosophical sense. They are a specific image of a specific economic condition, measurement, rationing, the weighing of how much is available against how many must be fed. The calculation of survival. That calculation is running right now. In 43 countries. For 49 million people, comment below. Leave a prayer for the people who are doing that calculation tonight. Because the next rider, the pale one, is where this sequence reaches its fullest and most terrible expression. They pale horse, death and what follows him verse 8. The fourth seal. A pale horse. The Greek word for the color is chloros, which means a kind of greenish yellow, the color of a thing that has been drained of life, sickly, decomposing, the color of something not quite dead but not quite alive. Its rider's name was Death. And Hades, the realm of the dead, followed close behind. This is the only rider who is named. The others are identified by what they carry or what they do. This one is named Death. Not a symbol for death. Not a representation of death. Death itself, given a horse, given a seal, given a fourth of the earth as its territory. The scope is explicit. 1 in 4. Every fourth person on the planet. Not a worst-case projection. The stated operational territory of a single rider. And the methods are listed: sword, famine, plague, wild beasts. The sword and the famine are the red and black horses extended. The plague is new to the sequence. And the wild beast, a phrase that some scholars read as a reference to disease vectors in the ancient understanding. The animals that carry sickness. The rats and insects and creatures that spread death through contact with humans. Between 2020 and 2024, roughly 20 million people died from COVID-19 as a direct cause, according to estimates published in The Lancet. The excess death figures, which measure how many more people died than would have been expected in the absence of the pandemic, are significantly higher. The Economist's model puts the figure at somewhere between 15 million and 24 million excess deaths in the period 2020 to 2023 alone. Simultaneously, the ongoing conflicts were producing their own death toll. Sudan, Ukraine, Yemen, Gaza, the Congo, Myanmar, each carrying its own statistics, each adding to a global death count that, when aggregated across all active conflicts and disease events, produces numbers that are difficult to hold in the mind as anything other than data. The wild beasts. In 2020, scientists at EcoHealth Alliance, the organization whose relationship with the Wuhan Institute of Virology later became the subject of congressional investigation, had for years been cataloging the spillover risk of bat coronaviruses into human populations. The crossing of a pathogen from an animal host into humans, what epidemiologists call zoonotic transmission, is the mechanism by which most new human diseases emerge. COVID-19 was, whatever its precise origin, an example of human civilization's proximity to animal disease, reservoirs producing catastrophic consequences. Since COVID, the scientific community has been in a sustained state of preparation for the next emergence event. The WHO's pandemic preparedness frameworks, the mRNA vaccine infrastructure built during COVID and immediately pivoted toward new pathogen targets including bird flu, the H5N1 avian influenza strain, which began spreading through U.S. dairy cattle herds in 2024, and produced the first confirmed human deaths from that specific clade in the United States, generating renewed concern about its pandemic potential. The pale horse does not require a single cataclysmic event to be visible. It can be visible in the accumulated death of a world under simultaneous pressure from war, hunger, and disease, each feeding the others, each lowering the threshold at which the next crisis becomes fatal. A world where 49 million people are one harvest failure from starvation. Where 59 armed conflicts are running simultaneously. Where a pandemic has already demonstrated that a single pathogen can reach every country in the world within weeks, 1/4 of the Earth. The rider's territory. The math of that is not comfortable. Global population is roughly 8 billion. 1/4 is 2 billion. The text does not say it kills 2 billion. It says it has power over that territory to kill by these methods. The number killed is not specified. The scope of the authority is the question the seals ask that nobody asks back. Here is where I want to stop and say something that prophetic content rarely says. The seals in Revelation 6 are not opened by the horseman. They are opened by the Lamb. Every seal in the chapter begins with the same phrase, when the Lamb opened the fourth seal. The Lamb initiates each event. The riders appear in response to the Lamb's action. They do not move on their own authority. This is not a small detail. It is the interpretive frame for the entire chapter. The Lamb is not helpless before the horseman. The Lamb is not watching in horror as the riders appear. The Lamb is the one opening the seals. He is the one with authority over the scroll. He is the one who, according to Revelation chapter 5, was found worthy to open it when no one else, in heaven or on earth or under the earth, could. Why would a lamb described as merciful and loving and good open seals that release war and famine and death onto the world? The book of Revelation is not primarily about the horseman. It is about the scroll. The scroll, which has 7 seals, is understood by most commentators as the title deed to the earth, the record of what was promised and what is owed. The document that, when fully opened, resolves the ancient conflict between the authority of God and the rebellion that has characterized human history since Genesis chapter 3. The seals are not punishment for its own sake. They are the process by which the scroll is opened. And the scroll's opening is the process by which the claim is settled. The world claimed by rebellion is being reclaimed by the one who has the right to it. The horsemen are not the story. They are the pressure that attends the resolution of the story. Understanding this changes the feeling of the passage. The 4 horsemen do not ride because God enjoys suffering. They ride because the world that has spent 6,000 years denying that God is Lord has consequences arriving for that denial. The consequences are not eternal, they are temporal, they are the labor pains, as Paul calls them in Romans chapter 8, of a creation groaning for the liberation that only comes when the scroll is fully open. Romans 8:22. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Groaning, not abandoned. Groaning towards something. The pain of childbirth is not the end of the story. It is the physical process through which the new life arrives. This does not make the suffering less real. It does not make 49 million hungry people less hungry. It does not bring back the dead from any of the 59 wars or from the pandemic. The suffering is real. The text never says it is not. What the text says is that it has a direction, that it is not random, that someone holds the scroll, and the someone is not a rider on a pale horse. If that reframing helps you breathe a little differently, stay with that. Comment below. Share this video with someone who has been watching the news and feeling the specific kind of dread that comes from seeing things get worse, with no framework for understanding why. Because the fifth seal changes everything about how the first four look. The fifth seal. The ons were already thera Revelation 6:9. The fifth seal. John writes, "When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they had maintained." No rider, no horse, no physical catastrophe. The fifth seal reveals what was already happening, invisibly, before and during all of it. Martyrs. People who died specifically because they believed something and would not stop saying so. Not war casualties, not famine victims. People specifically targeted because of faith. And they call out from under the altar. They ask how long? How long until their blood is avenged? How long until judgment? And they are given white robes and told to wait a little longer. Wait a little longer. The language is not dismissive. It is the answer of someone who has a timeline and knows where it is going. Not, we will get to it eventually. Wait a little longer. The organization that has tracked Christian persecution globally since 1955, published its 2024 World Watch List report with the following finding: 365 million Christians experienced high levels of persecution in 2024. That is 1 in 7 Christians worldwide. In the 50 countries with the highest persecution levels, more than 4,500 Christians were killed for their faith in the year covered by the report. 13 churches were attacked or closed every day. In Nigeria, Open Doors recorded more Christian deaths for faith-related reasons than any other country. In North Korea, an estimated 50,000 to 70,000 Christians are believed to be in labor camps. In China, the government's ongoing campaign to sinicize religion has resulted in the demolition of church buildings, the arrest of pastors, the removal of crosses from church structures, and the introduction of state-approved curriculum for Christian congregations. None of these numbers are widely discussed in the Western media. The stories break occasionally. A massacre in Nigeria, an arrest in China, a church burning in Pakistan. And then the news cycle moves to something else, and the suffering continues in the same silence it occupied before. The fifth seal says, "The souls of those who have been killed for their faith are already present and already crying out, already asking how long, already wrapped in white robes and told to wait." This seal is not a future prediction. If the martyrdom statistics from Open Doors are even approximately accurate, this seal has been open for a long time. People are dying right now because they will not deny what they believe. Every day. In multiple countries. In ways that the comfortable Western church discusses very little. The fifth seal should make every person who calls themselves a Christian ask a direct question. Not a comfortable question. A direct one. What would you not deny? If the faith you say you have were the specific thing that was going to cost you everything, would you keep it? The souls under the altar kept it. They paid the price, and they are waiting for the resolution that is coming. The sixth seal. The squai, change verse 12. The sixth seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair, the whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to earth. As figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind, the heavens receded like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. This is the seal that sounds most completely supernatural. The ones before it had political and economic parallels that the world could recognize without requiring a faith perspective. This one describes events that have no ordinary political explanation. But here is what is worth noting. Not what the text proves, what the text places in sequence. The sixth seal follows the fifth. The cosmic shaking follows the martyrdom. The heavenly signs follow the period in which those who died for their faith were still waiting. Joel chapter 2, verse 31, written around 800 BC. The sun will be turned to darkness, and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. The same imagery, the same sequence. Written 700 years before John wrote Revelation, and both pointing to the same set of conditions as a preceding sign. Peter quoted Joel in Acts chapter 2, on the day of Pentecost. He said this is what Joel was talking about. The Spirit poured out, signs in the sky, blood and fire and billows of smoke. Peter said it in 30 AD as a current event. He pointed to the fulfillment as beginning on that day. That creates a theological problem that has occupied scholars for 2,000 years. Did Joel's prophecy fully fulfill in 30 AD, or did it partially fulfill then, and continue toward a larger fulfillment? The partial fulfillment interpretation, sometimes called double fulfillment, is the most common approach among scholars who take both the Acts 2 reference and the Revelation 6 text seriously. Under that reading, the signs in the heavens described in Joel and echoed in Revelation are not a single event, but a category of event that will escalate in intensity. As history moves toward its conclusion, Solar Cycle 25, which began in December 2019 and was expected to peak in 2025, produced significantly more activity than forecasters had predicted. The Space Weather Prediction Center at NOAA revised its solar maximum forecast upward multiple times between 2021 and 2024. In October 2024, an X9.0 solar flare was recorded, the strongest in 2 decades. It produced a radio blackout across North America, South America, and the Pacific. GPS systems experienced disruption. High-frequency radio communications were knocked out across multiple frequency bands. An X9.0 flare. The scale runs to X1, X2, X10, X20. The Carrington event of 1859, which destroyed telegraph infrastructure across North America and Europe and produced auroras visible in the Caribbean, is estimated to have been equivalent to roughly an X45. A modern Carrington-level event would, according to a 2013 study by Lloyd's of London, cause between $600 billion and $2.6 trillion in damage to electrical infrastructure in the United States alone, and could leave parts of the country without power for months or years. The sun can go dark. Not metaphorically. In practical terms, a sufficiently large coronal mass ejection hitting the Earth's magnetosphere at the right angle can disrupt satellite communications, knock out power grids, and produce atmospheric effects that change the appearance of the sky to those observing from the ground. The 6 months before the 2024 solar flare saw auroras visible at latitudes where they are almost never seen. Brazil, Texas, southern France. People who had never seen the northern lights looked up from their backyards and saw the sky moving in colors they did not have a reference for. Luke chapter 21, verse 25. There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. On the earth, nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. Nations in anguish and perplexity. Not nations at war. Nations in anguish. The word in Greek is synoch, meaning constraint or distress, a pressing in from all sides, and perplexity. The Greek is aporia, a state of having no road, no clear path forward. The people running the nations of the world look at the current situation, and the honest ones will say, quietly, that they do not know what to do. The path forward is not clear. The options available are not good. This is not propaganda. This is what the leaders themselves say in private. Former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, 3 months before his death in 2023 at the age of 100, gave an interview in which he said, without hedging, that he believed the world was in its most dangerous period since World War II. He had served in government during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He had negotiated the opening of China. He had a reference point for dangerous. He said this is worse. The Sikking, and the question of timing there, is a consistent temptation in prophetic discussion to assign specific events to specific seals and announce that the timeline is confirmed. The first seal opened in this year, the second opened in that year. We are currently in the third. This video will not do that. The text does not support that kind of precision, and any teacher who claims it does is either misreading or misleading. What the sequence does suggest is a direction. The seals build on each other. Each creates conditions that make the next more plausible. A world in which peace is declared but not achieved becomes a world more susceptible to open conflict. A world in open conflict becomes a world in which food supply chains break. A world in which food supply chains break becomes a world in which death comes more easily by multiple causes. A world in which death has spread becomes a world in which the people who hold hope amid it are increasingly conspicuous and increasingly targeted. The direction is not upward. The conditions are not improving, and the honest reader of the passage does not get to the end and say, well, surely it will self-correct. This is not despair. It is the opposite of despair if you read what comes after the sixth seal. Revelation chapter 7, verse 9. Between the sixth seal and the seventh, John sees a vision of a multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They are wearing white robes, they are holding palm branches, and they are crying out in a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne and to the Lamb." Before the seventh seal, before the last and final act of this sequence, John sees the people who made it through. Not a small remnant surviving in a bunker. A multitude no one could count, from every nation, from every language, from every people group on the planet, standing, clothed, joyful, and in verse 13 one of the elders asks John, "These in white robes, who are they? And where did they come from?" And in verse 14, he answers his own question. "These are they who have come out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." Come out of the great tribulation. Not before it, not around it, not in spite of it, out of it, through it, past it, they were in it. And they came out. The white robes in chapter 7 are the same robes given to the martyrs under the altar in chapter 6. The people waiting. The people who were told to wait a little longer. Here they are. On the other side of the waiting, in the multitude. From every nation. This is the passage that rewrites every other passage in this chapter. The four horsemen are real. The conditions they describe are real. The suffering is real. And the multitude on the other side of it is also real. And it is beyond counting, the seventh seal and the half hour of silence. Revelation chapter 8, verse 1. The seventh and final seal, after the riders, after the earthquake and the sky changing and the mountains moving, after the multitude is seen standing before the throne, the seventh seal is opened. And there is silence in heaven for about half an hour, not trumpets, not thunder, not another announcement. Silence in a book that has been loud and vivid and relentless in its imagery since chapter 4. This moment stops everything. Silence. For half an hour, the rabbinical tradition, which John would have been familiar with, understood silence in the temple as the moment of highest sacred intensity. When the high priest entered the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement, the people outside waited in silence, not for a brief moment, for an extended period. Because something was happening that could not be observed from the outside, something so weighty that the appropriate human response was to be still. The half-hour of silence in Revelation 8 is the moment between the completion of one age and the beginning of the next. The seals are all open. The scroll is fully open. What was written inside it is now visible. And heaven pauses, Psalm 46 verse 10. Be still, and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations, I will be exalted in the earth. Be still. No. The stillness is not empty. It is full of a kind of knowing that requires silence to receive. In the middle of a world running 59 simultaneous armed conflicts, processing a food crisis affecting 49 million people, watching its peace indexes decline for 15 of 16 years, and looking up at a sky that has been producing aurora borealis at latitudes that have never seen it, the invitation of the seventh seal is silence, not the silence of despair. The silence of a waiting that has become so complete that the next sound, when it comes, will be something entirely new. Hat the horseman cannot take. Here is the thing that prophecy content almost never gets to, because getting to it requires slowing down and refusing to leave the viewer in fear. The four horsemen have authority over a fourth of the earth. They do not have authority over everything. The text specifies their territory. It limits their reach. And it does not include the one thing that every person watching this video actually cares about more than geopolitics or grain prices or solar flares. It does not include the human soul. The pale rider is named Death. Hades follows him. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword and famine and plague. Not given power over what happens after. Not given power over the destination of the people who die. The killing and the destination are two separate authorities, and the text does not give the pale rider both. John chapter 10, verse 28. Jesus says, I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. No one. The four horsemen are riding. They are not no one, but they are included in the no one. The rider named Death cannot snatch someone from the hand of the one who holds them. Death in Revelation is described as the last enemy in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 26. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. Last enemy. Not final authority enemy. Something that will be destroyed. Something that has not yet had the last word, whatever it looks like in the current chapter. The souls under the altar were already dead. The riders had already passed through their lives, and they were still present, still speaking, still waiting in white robes for the completion of what God had promised. Death was not the end of their story. It was a chapter in it. This is not a comfortable thing to sit with if you have lost someone recently. If the pale horse has visited your family in the last few years, none of this resolves that loss in a way that makes it hurt less right now. Grief is real. Loss is real. The text does not pretend otherwise. What the text offers is not an explanation of why the loss happened. It offers a frame that holds the loss within something larger than the loss itself. The frame does not eliminate the pain. It gives the pain a location, a context, a word that stands on the other side of it. That word is in Revelation chapter 21, verse 4. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. Old order. What is happening right now is the old order. It is a real order. It has real consequences. The horsemen in it are real, but it is described in the text as something that passes away, replaced by something that does not include the conditions the riders depend on to operate. No more death. The pale rider's territory ceases to exist. No more crying. The black rider's famine ends. No more pain. The red rider's sword is put away. No more mourning. The consequences of the white rider's false peace resolve into actual peace, with no more need for announced ceasefires that do not hold. The old order passes away. The description of what replaces it is in the final two chapters of the book that opens with four horsemen in chapter 6. The journey from the riders to the new creation is the length of the story, and the story is not finished. The invitation behind the rider's revelation. Chapter 6 contains something that most people skip entirely when they read it. It is in verses 15 through 17 at the end of the description of the sixth seal. Then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and everyone else, both slave and free, hid in caves and among the rocks of the mountains. They called to the mountains and the rocks, "Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb." The wrath of the Lamb. That phrase should stop any careful reader. Lambs are not associated with wrath. Lambs are gentle, vulnerable, passive. The image of a wrathful lamb is almost a contradiction, except that in Revelation, the lamb is not simply a symbol of gentleness. The lamb is the one who was slaughtered and yet lives. The lamb is the one who was subjected to the worst that human violence could do and absorbed it and did not remain dead. The lamb's wrath is not the wrath of power frustrated. It is the wrath of justice finally, fully, unable to be deferred any longer. And in verse 17, the people hiding in the caves ask, "For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can withstand it?" Who can withstand it? It is a real question. And the answer is given, not in verse 17, but in chapter 7, verse 9. The uncountable multitude standing before the throne in white robes. They withstand it. Not by surviving the physical events, but by standing on the side that the Lamb holds when the final accounting comes. The white robe is not something you earn on the last day. It is something you receive now, in the middle of the horseman's riding. The invitation to receive it is not suspended until the conditions improve. It is available right now, before the sixth seal, before the sixth seal's sky changes, while the black horse is still riding, and the scales are still weighing, and the food prices are still climbing, and the news still reports new conflicts in new countries. The invitation in Revelation is always the same. It comes from the same voice that opens the seals, from the Lamb who died and lives and holds the scroll. "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." That is Revelation 3:20. He is not waiting for the horseman to finish. He is knocking now. During the riding, while the seal events are building, who can withstand the wrath of the Lamb? The person in whose life that knock was answered. Not the person who figured out the timeline. Not the person who identified the specific historical events corresponding to each seal. The person who answered the knock, the closing. Before the seventh seal we started with a WFP report, with David Beasley saying catastrophe. With the grain prices, and the wars, and the displacement numbers. Those are real. They are documented. They are not invented to make a theological point, and they map, with a precision that is uncomfortable to dismiss, onto a text written on a prison island in the Aegean Sea, in the year 95 AD, by a man who had watched 11 of his 12 closest friends die for what they believed, who had survived the Emperor Nero's persecution, who was in his 90s and exile, when he wrote what he had seen in a vision and sent it to 7 churches in what is now Western Turkey. John was not writing to frighten people. The opening of Revelation is not a threat. Revelation 1:3 says, "Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear it and take to heart what is written in it, because the time is near." Blessed. The first word used to describe the experience of reading Revelation is blessed. Not terrified, not overwhelmed, blessed. The person who reads it and hears it and takes it to heart receives a blessing from it. The blessing is not ignorance of the horseman. It is knowledge of the one who opens the seals. If you know who holds the scroll, if you know the Lamb who was slain and lives, then the horsemen look different. Not small, not harmless, not ignorable, but different. Framed, located inside a story that they do not get to end. They ride. They have authority over a fourth of the earth. They do their work in the time given to them, and then the seventh seal opens, and there is half an hour of silence. And into that silence comes something that has no rider, no sword, no scales, just stillness, and the sound of what is next. If you have been awake since the beginning of this video, stay awake, not in fear, in the specific kind of attention that Revelation 3:2 describes. Wake up. Strengthen what remains and is about to die. Strengthen it. There is something in you that has been awake through this whole video, and that something is worth strengthening. Not just watching more content. Strengthening. Getting into the text. Getting into a community of people who are also taking this seriously. Praying. Turning. Comment below. Leave the word watching or leave a prayer. Share this with one person today who is carrying the weight of the current news without a frame that holds it. Subscribe to the channel, because the next video in this series covers what comes after the silence. And before you go, one more thing. The uncountable multitude, chapter 7, was not a group of people who had everything figured out. It was a group of people described in verse 14 as having washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. Washed. Past tense. Already done. A completed action that placed them, when the final accounting came, on the side of the one whose territory the horsemen cannot enter. That action is available right now, today. Before the next seal opens, before the next news cycle, before the next report from the WFP, the door is there. The knock has been going on longer than any of us have been alive. Swear it. Lord, for every person watching this today, let the horsemen they see in the news become a reason to run toward you and not away. Let the fear become faith. Let the scale in the black rider's hand remind them of the scales of your mercy, which always outweigh what is owed. Let the red rider's sword remind them that you hold every sword, and let the pale rider remind them that you are the resurrection and the life, and that whoever believes in you, though they die, yet shall they live.